Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hoff, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. Hello. Today I have with me Megan McCutchen, LPC. Megan is a therapist specializing in perinatal mental health. You can connect with Megan at perinatalplace.com or meganmccutcheon.com. She also offers a birth bundle for pregnant moms and coaching for new moms. Megan is the mother of three, and she is here today to talk about intrusive thoughts. Megan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking to you, and so many things we have to talk about.
Oh, so many, so little time.
Yes.
Well, can you start off by explaining what intrusive thoughts are and what they mean?
Yes, absolutely. So intrusive thoughts is something that I see really common in the perinatal period. So it can happen during pregnancy, and it can also happen postpartum. And, it's honestly one of the most frequent things that I see in the moms that come into my therapy or coaching practices for support. A lot of us know about postpartum depression. I don't think everyone is as familiar with postpartum anxiety, but the intrusive thoughts, we actually technically call it postpartum OCD or perinatal OCD. And I like to kind of describe it as a flavor of perinatal anxiety. And so what intrusive thoughts are they are just these pesky little thoughts, often scary, that pop into your brain throughout the day. So for pregnant moms, it often shows up as things like, what if my baby's not safe? What if I miscarry? What if I eat something that harms the baby? What if I move in a way or exercise and do something that harms the baby? And then postpartum, it often shows up as, again, like fear of harm to baby. Like, what if this isn't safe for baby? What if I accidentally drop baby? What if we're in the car and we get in a car accident? So things like that. And the thing that's tough about it is that these are these intrusive, unwanted thoughts that just kind of come into your brain when your brain tends to run a little more anxious. And it's tough because it's things that can actually happen in some instances. So it's not completely true that it's irrational. A lot of times with anxiety, we talk about irrational fears. So these are things that could happen, but the chances are very, very low. And for a lot of moms, the reason we call it OCD is because it has this sort of obsessive quality to it, where these thoughts just kind of obsessively come into your mind and you're sort of all day long obsessively thinking about them, or, they sort of pile on at a certain time of the day. I think you and I were talking about sometimes for people, it can come on in the evening, or, sometimes there's just certain times of day where your mind is more anxious and these thoughts just kind of rapid fire start coming in. And the compulsion part to the OCD is there's often a tendency to either seek reassurance or to avoid. So I'll give a couple examples. I was working with a mom this week who had an obsessive fear around, what if I didn't sterilize the bottles enough? Like, what if these bottles that I'm using for my baby aren't safe, aren't clean? Baby somehow gets salmonella or some sort of thing that upsets her system or, is catastrophic. And so she was obsessing over this thought that the bottles weren't sterilized, the bottles weren't clean enough. And the compulsion she was engaging in was just frantically searching the internet for any sort of article that dismissed that fear, that said, that's a very low risk, that anything will happen with unsterilized bottles. And then, so for some other moms, it might look like, what if I accidentally hurt my baby while I'm giving them a bath? And these are kind of these catastrophic thoughts. So what if I accidentally drown my baby while I'm giving him a bath? And they will sometimes avoid that situation to avoid the anxiety. So they'll say, okay, let's get partner to give the bath. I'm not going to do this. They'll want somebody else to be present. They'll really avoid doing things with the baby alone. And what happens in those situations is it actually just serves to increase the anxiety. So like that OCD cycle, there's this obsession over this fearful thought. There's the compulsion to either avoid it or seek reassurance from it. And then it just strengthens the thought, and the thoughts just kind of come more and more. So what we actually want to be doing when we have these intrusive thoughts is just really sitting with them. sitting through them. I always tell moms, it's really important to just acknowledge it for what it is. So just be able to say to yourself, okay, this is an intrusive thought. This is a piece of postpartum anxiety. I know what it is. And really important for moms to know that thoughts do not equal reality. Just because you're having this thought doesn't mean it's going to be true, doesn't mean you're wishing anything to come true, doesn't mean you want to hurt your baby, nothing like that. So one of the exercises that I'll sometimes do with moms, and listeners can do it here, is, okay, raise your right hand. And then as you have your hand in the air, say, I cannot possibly raise my right hand. There's no way I can raise my right hand. There's absolutely no way I can raise my right hand. Well, you're raising your right hand. If you put your right hand up as you said that. So that's just a little kind of example of thoughts do not equal reality. If you're literally raising your right hand and saying, I cannot raise my right hand, those don't jive. And so that's just a good reminder that just because your brain thinks something doesn't make it true. So if you're thinking something like, we might get in a car accident, if I bring my baby in the car, that's just a thought. The actual chances of you actually getting in a car accident are very low. If you're driving safely, if you're following, stop signs, red lights, driving the speed limit, it's actually a very low chance that will happen. So really important to just remind yourself, okay, this is an intrusive thought. This is just my anxiety. And it doesn't mean that this thought is true. And so when you just sort of sit with it, rather than avoid it or run away from it, it helps you to learn to tolerate the thought more. And then those thoughts gradually start to decrease. One of the analogies that I like to use with anxiety, and in particular intrusive thoughts, is kind of think of an ocean wave. And if you've ever been in the ocean and kind of like by the surf, when the waves start getting bigger, you know that, often the tendency is to run from the wave, to run to the shore and to run away from it. But there's a really big risk that it's going to actually catch you and you're going to get sort of tumbled over. So to really stay safe in those waves, you want to dive through it. When you dive through the wave, it really can't knock you down. And so that's the same sort of concept with anxiety and with these intrusive thoughts. Think about just riding the wave of the anxiety, just acknowledging that it's there and just sort of like letting it be. When we try and run from it, when we try and resist it, it just grows stronger and has more of the potential to knock us off our feet. So these thoughts can be really scary for moms, but they are things that are treatable. They often do get better with time, just with some distance. We don't know exactly why postpartum anxiety or perinatal anxiety happens. We just know that it does. And what I like to say is that for anyone that runs a little on the anxious side, if they've had any form of anxiety before getting pregnant and having a baby, there's a really good chance that anxiety is going to really skyrocket. That was sort of the case for me. Looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, I probably always was a little anxious, but not in a debilitating way, and more just, I was able to get stuff done. I was able to function with it. And then after having a baby, that's when my anxiety really flared up. And for me, it at first showed up as brain fog, confusion, just difficulty making decisions, like this sort of need to constantly be busy. And at the time, I really sort of dismissed it. It was with my second child. So I kind of told myself, oh, it's just, adjusting to life with two babies. And it wasn't until it escalated and became more of this OCD type of thinking, these intrusive thoughts, that I realized like, oh, something's going on here. I started having the thought of, I wonder if it would feel good to throw my baby down the staircase. I remember going into my doctor's office and she was really validating, because when I told her that, she's like, yep, I had an intrusive thought too. Mine was, what if I throw my baby in this pot of chili I'm cooking? So sometimes it can be these like really sort of ridiculous things, but it makes moms feel so terrible because they look at themselves and they think, oh my God, am I a terrible mom? Do I want to hurt my baby? Do I not love my baby? What is wrong with me that I'm thinking these terrible things? So there's nothing wrong with moms that are having these intrusive thoughts, no matter how, awful they are. For some moms, unfortunately, it shows up in sexual ways. So there's sometimes moms that start obsessively thinking these intrusive thoughts of like, what if I accidentally molest my baby while I'm changing the diaper? What if I can't save my baby from this world and a child predator harms them? So these can be really disturbing and disruptive thoughts for moms kind of wondering, why am I thinking this way? We don't know exactly why it happens again, but it is a part of postpartum anxiety, and it's nothing to feel guilty about. It's just something to really recognize as, okay, I'm having some symptoms of an anxiety disorder occurring and I can get help for it.
Yeah, all of that is so interesting and validating because I feel like I experienced the same thing postpartum. And with my first pregnancy, I didn't get treated because I didn't recognize it for what it was. I think that sometimes it can be a little sneaky because
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it can seem like something that could happen and that maybe you could control. And so I found myself trying to just fix the situation
Yeah.
instead of realizing that this was just something that was eating away at my time and making me super anxious.
Yeah.
I can't remember what all of mine were, but they were, I mean, and I guess I think that people, when you say people that run on the side of anxious, I just remember as a kid having intrusive thoughts like, what if I jump in front of this car?
Yeah.
And I would just be like, that's weird. Why would I think that? They just jump into your head and then they go away, but they just get more, I feel like, intense and terrifying in
Yes.
postpartum, at least from my experience.
Absolutely. That's so true. They get more intense. They can happen more frequently. And it's different when it's your own self and you have this intrusive thought, what if I jump in front of a car? What if I jump off of a balcony? And you're not going to do it. But then when it comes down to your child, it can be even more disturbing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think part of it is like sort of our biological wiring as mothers, as nurturers. It's sort of our instinct, our natural instinct to protect our child that I always say just kind of goes a little haywire. It goes a little bit off the deep end to the point where we're like over stressing about baby safety and if they're okay.
Yeah. So for intrusive thoughts, I love your analogy of sitting and diving through the wave and really just sitting with it, and your exercise of raising your hand and showing that they're just thoughts and they can't do anything. If those things don't work,
Mm-hmm.
or if they work but they're not enough and the thoughts are just debilitating, what are some other options?
Yeah. So for some people, that's really enough just to have awareness. I have a lot of moms that come into my therapy practice and we really only meet once or a couple of times because what they really need is just this reassurance that, hey, I know what you're dealing with. It's not the end of the world. You're going to be okay. You're not crazy. And here's, how to cope with it. And so for some of them, just managing it mentally is enough. And then for others, if it doesn't seem to get better, or if those thoughts have already become so frequent and distressing that they really feel like they can't control it just through their own thinking, then medication is often something that I refer them to look into. Medication can really, really help in these situations. And something that's really important for moms to know is that often in the perinatal period, especially when intrusive thoughts are present, you often need a higher dose than you normally would need. So I have so many moms coming in who are already on Zoloft or one of the other medications for their anxiety. Maybe they've been on it all along throughout their pregnancy, or maybe they got on it after because of anxiety. But if the dose isn't high enough for them, then it's not treating these thoughts. So many people kind of panic about, but I'm already on medication. And so we'll always look at the dosage. And often I'm referring them back to their prescribing doctor to just, I have a little cheat sheet in my office on what the right dosings are, and they tend to be a little higher. So I'm often referring them back to just say, see if you could go up a little bit. And for a lot of moms, that ends up really helping. Sometimes it doesn't completely take away the intrusive thoughts, but often you'll start to see a decrease in them and a decrease in their frequency. So I really recommend, I'm not a big medication pusher generally, but I really do think it can be helpful during this period, and in particular with this form of postpartum anxiety. So it's something to consider. It's not harmful to the baby, even if you're breastfeeding. And then the other thing too is really just managing your anxiety kind of on the whole. So the way that I like to describe it is, imagine you're holding this platter and on top of it are all these bricks. Each stressor is another brick. And if you're just holding a couple stressors, a couple bricks, it's okay to balance. You can manage it. But the more you start piling that weight up, the harder it becomes to really manage. And that's when we see anxiety really peaking. So a lot of times people will start to track the pattern that the more stressed they are, the more anxious they are around just the circumstances in their life, the worse their intrusive thoughts get. So I really like to work with moms to teach them anxiety managing tools. I have a course called Empowered Motherhood, where I teach a lot of this stuff around managing your thinking. And I have lots and lots of mindfulness tools and techniques that you can use to manage your anxiety. And what's so important is that people start learning these tools and start practicing them regularly during moments when they're not already panicked, when they're not already feeling anxious. A lot of times people kind of push it to the back burner and they're like, okay, well, maybe I'll try this like deep breathing or this mindfulness tool or whatever when I'm really anxious. If you're already to the point of anxiety, it's going to be harder. So I really like to teach moms to start implementing these things just kind of like as part of their routine into their everyday life. And that helps to keep the anxiety from escalating. And the less the anxiety escalates, the fewer and farther between these intrusive thoughts will start to become.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like also, and I know we've talked about this before, I didn't figure out until my first child was about 3 that I was having anxiety. And then it wasn't until after my second was born that I got treated, but it just feels like it was kind of prolonged. And sometimes I think that having a baby is just kind of the tipping point. It's the added stressor that can kind of just make everything kind of topple over into overwhelming anxiety, or just barely like maybe you're treading water, but you're just getting really tired and not really able to manage it, but you're not drowning. So you can kind of deny it a little bit. And I feel like just like that little bit of medication is what kind of helped me get to the point where I felt like I was myself again. I was a little bit more in control. And while I still will have thoughts that come in, I feel like they just kind of float away now instead of lingering and feeling like something that I have to solve, an impossible problem that I have to solve to protect my family. And I really think that it's important, like you said, that moms find the tools to be able to move through that, because it's maddening to have all of that piling up on your shoulders and to feel like you actually are someone that can control that, when the solution is either to manage your anxiety through the mental work or the medication, or both, ideally.
Yeah.
If you need it, if you need the medication, but also definitely learn how to manage your mind. So I think that's so important, and not many moms know about it.
Right. One of the analogies I like for medication and sort of what you were describing is that sometimes it's like we're kind of in this hole with depression or with anxiety, and it's really hard to climb out on your own. And the medication can sometimes be like that ladder that gives you the little boost you need. And often we need it. People, yes, there's a lot of things that we can do to manage, our thoughts and to fight depression or anxiety mentally and on our own without medication. But sometimes we need that extra boost, and that extra boost is going to be what we need in order to be able to start implementing some of those other things. And so, it doesn't have to be a forever thing. That's one of the questions that I get asked a lot too, is how long am I going to have to be on this medication? And one of the mistakes people make is they do get on the medication and then they feel better. And so then they go off of it. But what we know is that it really takes 6 months to 8 months to a year, I like to say, for the neurotransmitters and the chemicals in your brain to really balance out. So I always tell people, if they're going to try the medication and it starts to work, great. Stay on that medication for at least 6 months to a full year from when you feel better, to really kind of let things even out. And then you can, if you feel like you don't want to be on it longer term, that's totally fine. You can work with your doctor, you can wean off of it, and you may not need it anymore. But that's a really important thing too when we're considering medication, is to stay on it long enough that you let it do its job. Otherwise, you risk relapsing.
Right. And also not have the expectation that you have to go off of it.
Yeah.
That you will automatically be fine in a year, because you just had a baby.
You just had a baby.
And you have this tiny little person that you have to take care of. And that is hard.
Right.
And sometimes you just need a little help.
That's right.
To balance those emotions.
Are you pregnant and planning a hospital birth? You don't need a birth plan. You need a birth vision. In my opinion, birth plans set you up for failure. Yep, I said it. Hear me out before you turn off this podcast. You may think that by downloading a generic birth plan, it means you're in control. The truth is, it's not that simple. No one can control exactly how their birth will go. There are way too many variables. What every pregnant person wants is to walk into the hospital pregnant and to walk out with a healthy newborn in their arms. The journey in between is the murky part. It's hard to know what issues might come up that need to be addressed. If you focus your energy on a birth vision rather than giving your power to a birth plan, you can empower yourself to make the best choices for you and your baby. That's why you need to get into my Empowered Hospital Birth program. As a labor nurse and mindset coach, I can help guide you through the process of maintaining the calm autonomy that will help you achieve the birth vision you desire. In my Empowered Hospital Birth program, I will help you identify the source of anxiety you have surrounding hospital birth, fill in knowledge gaps to make sure that you are fully informed and confident, learn key phrases so you can better communicate with your medical team, emotionally process your fears so that they don't hold power over you. Go to kellyhoff.com/empowered to book a free 30-minute private birth vision call, where we will identify your top fears and must-haves and gain clarity on exactly how you want to feel in the birth space. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey.
Yeah. And that analogy I was using earlier about imagine you have this platter and you're putting all these different bricks on it. Like you permanently put this giant brick on top of your load that you're carrying, which is this human to take care of. And so a lot of people think, like, oh, I should be able to do this without medication. I shouldn't be feeling this way. Those thoughts just really increase the anxiety. So give yourself some grace and just be able to recognize this is a huge transition. And it's okay that I am not, just flying through this easily. Like it's okay that I need a little bit of support and a little bit of help, and I'm really adjusting to this transition.
So it's not just that you have this one huge brick, because that one huge brick comes with so many other little tiny bricks that get tied. There's just so much, and it doesn't go away. It's every problem that you ever had as your own human being. Maybe you got to a point as your own person, as an adult that decided to have a baby. Maybe you got to the point where you could manage all of your own load, right? But then every child you have, you're taking on the load of a whole other human and all of the things that go with that, and all of their anxieties and feelings and emotions and just everything that goes with that. And so you have to do the work to learn how to manage that. And additionally, when someone has the thought, which I think we all do, I should be able to do this. First of all, let's just throw it out there that many, many, many of us are getting help to do this. Many of us have realized that we do need the help, we do need the medication, and we do need to learn the tools to get through this. Additionally, in the past, there was a village that existed that in our culture has kind of fallen by the wayside. And there's more of this focus on independence that I believe is stressing women out, and all of this competition to be the best at everything. And so we as a society have moved toward this toxic independence, I think, that puts so much pressure on women.
Yes. Well, the other thing that came up for me as you were saying that too was like, what's one of the differences in today's society? And I was thinking about social media and all the pressure. I think that is such a catalyst for anxiety for women, because there's so much comparison to what they see on social media and what are people posting. Often it's like their beautiful newborn photos, or, them nursing the baby and everything looks beautiful and happy. And so moms get in their head with that comparison. I should be doing this with ease too. What they don't realize is that behind that one image you see on Instagram or the video on TikTok, there's probably all these outtakes, and there's probably all these moments where, stuff is not going as smoothly as you might think from that one snapshot. And so we have to be really careful to not compare ourselves to what we're seeing on social media, and instead just realize that this is hard and there is no such thing as a perfect mom or a perfect parent. And when we fall into this perfectionism trap and this comparison trap, that is a catalyst for when anxiety really starts to increase.
Yeah. I think it was a few weeks ago, I saw Marie Kondo has said that she no longer does the spark joy
I've been meaning
of
to
her
look that
house.
up. I saw something about like Marie Kondo, like she takes it all back. So I've been meaning to look that up.
Yes.
Yes.
She was like, my house is messy. Yes. She says,
Yes.
I have
Yes.
kids, and so therefore my house is messy. And I was
Yes.
like, yes, thank you. Because I remember trying to organize my drawers when my daughter was, before she was a year old, and do like the Marie Kondo thing and just stressing myself out about it. And now
Yeah.
to know that even Marie Kondo can't do it.
Yes,
Makes me feel
that
so
is
much better.
that is so good to know. I love a lot of her stuff, and I do love her folding method and things like that. But I think we need to remember, like, it's not sustainable all of the time with all
Right.
the demands we have and the children messing things up, and just living with children there's no such thing as perfection.
There is none, yes. And they're also trying to figure it out themselves. So letting go and letting that perfection slide and letting them do it in their own imperfect way as they make their way in the world. I had a friend that she was my next door neighbor. She had 4 girls, and I just could not imagine how she did it. And she was like, I just let go of all the perfection. I have them fold their own clothes and it's ugly, and I just have to walk away and let them do their thing, and they're going to figure it out someday. And it's so true.
It's really important because anxiety often is about this desire to try and control your environment, to try and control things. And parenting is all about letting go of control and,
Yeah.
letting go of perfectionism and relaxing your standards, at least,
Yes.
to some degree at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. Because once you have that anxiety and you put that on yourself, your kids see that, and then your kids have that anxiety and that stress and have to meet that level of perfection as well. And I don't think that anybody wants to pass that on.
Exactly. So true. Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was so great and so relatable was Michelle Obama saying that when the kids were little, she couldn't stand Barack.
Yes. Yes.
I was like, I feel you there. Like,
Yeah.
why do you get to go out and do something? Like, why do you get to go golf? And those little mini resentments, I know because I'm a nurse and I work until I get home at 8 p.m. And my husband's always like, God, I've been here with the kids. And I'm like, but I've been at work. And we're just like comparing and fighting and like, yeah, well, I've been working harder than you. No, you. And it's like, guys, everybody's working hard.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. And that's like another way that the anxiety shows up often, a little bit separate from the intrusive thoughts, but there's some overlap in terms of like the should statements. Like I should be getting equal alone time, or I should be liking my husband more than I am right now, or whatever the case may be. So watching out for not only intrusive thoughts, but just like that rigid language that sets you up to feel anxious.
Yes. And then I remember back when my kids were a lot littler and they didn't monopolize the television like they do now. I watched the news a lot.
Yeah.
And I know that that's where a lot of my intrusive thoughts came from.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, because I didn't necessarily make the choice to stop watching the news, it just became something that we didn't really do because when the kids were there, I didn't want them to see it. And then at night, I was just too exhausted.
Yeah.
So I've noticed an increase in my mood. Like my mood is so much better now that I'm not hearing about every single sensationalized, violent report that comes our way. And I think that like you were talking about the social media and in the constant barrage of news, that is such a trigger for anxiety.
It is.
And I think that's a lot of what's happening to people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is another difference. Yeah. Like the social media, like we have way more access to news, 24/7 round the clock and all these different, we get like alerts popping up on our phone. And that really triggers anxiety. Like I do not watch the news. I am very uninformed about what's going on in the world. It's probably kind of bad, but like it's what I need to do, and so I'll catch up on the important things. But I have a handful of clients who know that if they come in and they start talking about something going on in the world, they have to give me the overview because I don't regularly watch the news because it really increases my anxiety. And it's just, so much of it, it's important to be informed and to know what's going on, but so much of it doesn't impact my day-to-day life. And so I have to be really careful about how much I let in and being okay and being stable in my day-to-day life without letting all of the things spark the anxiety, spark the intrusive thoughts. When you're constantly seeing all these awful things in the news and you're a new mom, it really can start bleeding into your thinking. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally. I know that when I drove to work when my daughter was little, there was someone that jumped off of an overpass and onto an oncoming car and killed the person inside as well as the person that And I'm not kidding you. It like for a year, I was terrified every time I went under an overpass, to the point where I was looking up instead of looking at the road. And that was a thought that kept coming. And to me, because I hadn't really dealt with it, I didn't realize, for me, it felt like something I could control.
Right.
If I look up while I'm driving,
yes,
and this is irrational, right? If I look up while I'm driving, I will see the person that's trying to jump and I will be able to avoid them. Right. But what's the bigger danger?
Taking your eyes off the road. And
exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it wasn't until I actually shared it with a friend of mine. She was like, you know what? That is your anxiety. And that is something that is treatable. And is that rational? And like, we kind of worked through it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. It was just this compulsion that I had to, and I totally see where this ties in with OCD, because it is a compulsion to control that.
Yeah.
To feel like you can actually do something with those thoughts, that they're there protecting you, when in reality, they're probably just making things harder.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think you bring up a really good point, because sometimes these intrusive thoughts are just so random. It's like, where the heck are these thoughts coming from? Other times they do stem from something in particular. And I've worked with a lot of people who we've had to like, okay, let's take a pause while you're pregnant and postpartum and not watch like the murder mysteries or listen to the murder podcast. Let's stop watching Law and Order SVU. Let's just take a break from that. And then sometimes there are intrusive thoughts that come that are triggered by a specific thing that happened. Like for you, it was that story of somebody actually jumping over the overpass. Sometimes people, if they have been, in a car accident, for example, or anything really that they witnessed or that they heard about, an anxious brain and an OCD brain is what I call really sticky. If it hears an anxious thought, or if it hears a news story, it kind of sticks in the brain, and then you obsessively think about it. So one of the things that I do in therapy is something called EMDR.
Yeah.
So it's a trauma treatment where, like for you, if you did, a couple sessions, sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's like one session. If it's a specific single incident, it can help to like unstick that thought from your brain and to reprocess it so that it's not constantly getting re-triggered, and so that you're not always pairing driving under an overpass with, oh my God, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. That's so amazing, because I've actually, since we talked about it, I've had several moms that I've interviewed that have had really, really good success with EMDR.
It's great. It's a great tool.
It's an amazing tool, I think, especially for birth trauma, because it really focuses on that one incident. Yep. And then you can unpair that one moment that we want to celebrate the birth of your baby with all the trauma that may have happened. But also, if you have the traumatic moments anytime in your life that are just sticking in there, I think it's helpful.
I think this is important. And one of the things that I like to tell moms is, as you're pregnant and getting ready to have a baby, if you have anything in your history that feels traumatic, that does kind of create the sticky anxiety, it's a great time to work through it, to kind of get ahead of it, stirring up anxiety postpartum. Or if you're already on that other side and you're feeling that anxiety, get help, because these things are totally treatable. And why suffer? When I was telling you my story and I had some symptoms and I was like, I don't think it's anything. And it wasn't until the intrusive thoughts came that I realized. And at that point I got treatment, I got on medication, and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, why did I struggle with this for so many weeks before I realized, and because it was like a night and day difference.
It is so wonderful to feel like yourself again.
Yes.
And it's like, you don't even realize it until you do.
And that's the thing, when you're in the anxiety, there's a lot of like, am I crazy? Am I ever going to feel normal again? And yes, you absolutely can.
Yeah. And one time I remember having an intrusive thought one time and being able to kind of divide the thought from my being, if that makes sense. Like it was almost like an out of body experience. I realized that thought wasn't coming from me. Yeah. It wasn't coming from my rational person. And it was just kind of there in my brain. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I can just kind of separate this from my personhood or myself.
Yes.
And realize that it's just something that's there. And if that helps anyone, realize that this is just something that the chemistry of our brain just kind of does. It means nothing. It means nothing regarding who you are and whether you're crazy and all this stuff. It just means that maybe you got some work to do, and there's people out there that can help.
There's a book that I love to recommend. It's a kid's book, but I love to recommend it to adults too. I think it's called When Kids Worry Too Much. It has like a tomato plant on the front. And one of the ways that they describe these anxiety thoughts, these intrusive thoughts are like worry monsters. And I love that because yes, like exactly like you're saying, separating them from it being a part of you and being like this other little intrusive monster, having that visual has helped a lot of clients I've worked with to really separate it from themselves and then realize, yeah, that thought is not actually me. It's just an intrusive thought and it's not reality and it's not something I really need to pay any attention to.
Yeah, that is a game changer.
One more thing that I want to make sure to say whenever I'm talking about these intrusive thoughts, they can be kind of scary. I also want to just kind of separate it from perinatal psychosis, especially now, if anyone's been following what happened in Boston, where a mom of 3 tragically killed her children. This is not what we're talking about. This is not the perinatal OCD we're talking about. These thoughts of what if I hurt my child? What if I accidentally do something dangerous? This is not the same as what that mom was dealing with. And when we hear these stories of suicide or homicide in the perinatal period, it's a very different thing. Perinatal OCD is not actually something you're going to act on when you have these scary thoughts. They're just thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people know this. And I have unfortunately had some situations. I may have talked about this in our last episode. I don't remember, but I have had some moms that have come to me and been traumatized because they told a medical professional, I'm having scary thoughts of like throwing my baby down the stairs, and they've been sent to the ER thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to hurt your baby. And that is just not the case with this. This is a very different situation. And it's really important for people to know that, for providers to know that. When moms are experiencing these OCD thoughts, they're very bothered by it. They know that they're not healthy. They have extreme anxiety because of the thoughts. It's very different when a mom is in a psychotic state. When she's having these intrusive thoughts, they're more like, my baby's possessed by the devil. They're more sort of this demonic nature. When she's in that paranoid state or that psychotic state, she's not aware that she's thinking irrationally and that she's thinking in these scary ways. So I think that's really important. I think a lot of moms right now are really rattled because of this recent tragedy in the news. And so for anyone who has these OCD, anxiety types of thoughts, I just want to let you know it's a different situation, and make sure that if you are getting help, you're reaching out to somebody who's really well trained in these disorders so they know what they're dealing with and you get the right kind of support.
Absolutely. And I think that pops up every few years because it's so shocking and gets so sensationalized in the media.
Yeah.
But it is so important to know the difference. And I would love to do another episode more on postpartum psychosis, because I hear that term thrown around a lot without it really being completely understood. Yeah. And I am guilty of thinking that some of those thoughts that I had were postpartum psychosis.
Yeah, absolutely. You wonder like, oh my gosh, am I like the mom I heard about in those news? And those stories are sensationalized, but it is on a spectrum. And so we should definitely talk about it more and explain more about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for differentiating, because that's important. And I had it in my mind and then it just kind of flew out. But thank you.
Yeah. So I guess the main takeaway is, remember that these intrusive thoughts are just intrusive thoughts. It's a piece of postpartum anxiety or anxiety during pregnancy. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's going to happen, doesn't mean you're going to act upon it. And the treatment is really just being able to talk yourself down from it, acknowledge it, but recognize that, it's not reality. And if just that alone isn't helping, reach out to your provider and see if you can get started on some medication that should really help decrease the frequency and duration of these thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Megan.
You're welcome.
Very informative. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I am validated and I learn more.
Yes, I know. I could talk about this stuff. I love talking about it. I think it's so important. I was sort of horrified that I, as a therapist, a mental health therapist, wasn't aware of some of these things until I experienced it myself. So I just am very passionate about ending the lack of awareness.
Exactly. Yeah. We're going to shout it from the rooftops until everybody knows about it.
Yes.
All right, Megan. Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
You too. Thanks so much for having me on.
Let's face it, moms are busy. We're so busy taking care of others that we rarely have time to take care of ourselves. I'd love to simplify that for you. I'm offering a free 15-minute hair care or skincare consult to help you find an uncomplicated routine using clean, vegan, anti-aging hair care and skincare products that follow the strict EU standards for safety. For your free consult, just send me an email at birthjourneysrn@gmail.com and we'll schedule a call.
I'm excited to be a part of your self-care journey. Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Don't forget to share the podcast with a friend who can benefit from the valuable insights that we share here. And if you could take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me. If you're ready to work one-on-one with me to embark on a transformational journey towards a confident and empowered hospital birth experience, go to kellyhoff.com/empowered and enroll in my Empowered Hospital Birth Coaching Program. Together, we'll create a roadmap to a birth experience that you'll cherish forever. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. Let's make your birth experience extraordinary.